Welcome back to Fox 5 Amplified. With us is Joe Vigil, who it is now the time that most kids dread. Parents sometimes like. It is back to school, August 10th for the students here in Clark County. And you got a chance to sit down with the superintendent.
Yeah, we sat down, did a little one-on-one, talked about many different things. The first thing I asked about was e-devices. You know, we've been covering this so much lately, and we've had more than 400 students hit by cars. That was last year. And so we talked about e-bikes and so forth. And I kind of said to her, I said, well, what do you think we need to do about it? And one of the things she said was helmets. You know, wear the right helmet. You know, because, and I've done stories on this before where, you know, some of these devices are going 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. Yeah. Bike helmet is just not enough. In fact, I remember a story I did a while back where they talked about, you know, using a motorcycle helmet for some of these devices. She wanted, of course, people to pay attention, drivers. She goes, and I asked her, I said, you know, hey, do we need more officers in the district to kind of deal with this? And she said, you know, we just need drivers to slow down. That's what it is. She said we wouldn't need them if we had that. So and also said, you know, teach your kids about these devices. Make sure they're aware and make sure they're 100% focused. I mean, you've been out there and you see some of these people and they're not paying a whole lot of attention. They don't have the helmet on. You know, we saw some video one time of a young girl, but probably early teens, driving down one part of town on her scooter right next to a truck.
A big intersection,
you know? And just going down like, you know, no care in the world. So, you know, they're very concerned about it. So that was one of the things.
It's interesting that even though, you know, it's back to school, we want to talk about academics and things like that, that this has dominated the conversation for the last year.
It has.
I mean, it's all we've really been talking about, not just with law enforcement, when it comes to teenagers and students and stuff, law enforcement, and now the school district as well.
Right. You know, and prior to this interview, we actually sat down and talked to CCSD police. This was a department event where we could go to different departments and talk to everybody. And same thing there. I mean, there's a lot of concern about that. You know, you have, it doesn't seem to be slowing down either. You know, we've talked to Sunrise Hospital, we've talked to UMC. Sunrise surpassed their injuries a couple months ago for the entire year. For the entire year, and I think they were projecting close to maybe 800 injuries by the end of the year. So so the discussion won't stop there.
No, it's not going to. I mean, because the use of them is going to continue. I mean, it's like you can see parents are probably getting asked by their kids to get them and whatever, but they are a tool. You know, it is like a bike. You can get somewhere. Maybe even younger or older teenagers might have a job. They can get to it with this thing. But it's like it's a combination of drivers not paying attention, but also people on the scooters not paying attention or not knowing or following the rules of the road because they don't have a driver's license, so they haven't gone through all these courses that a person would go through before they get a driver's license. So they're not following the rules of the road, which makes it even harder when you're a driver to anticipate what they're going to do.
Exactly. And one thing I forgot to mention with helmets is huge, is that, you know, people under 18 have to wear them on these devices, bikes and everything. So but you know, Sunrise has told us, you know, not many people are, you know, so a lot of the injuries could be prevented, you know, if they had a good helmet. Again, not just a bike helmet, but a helmet rated for the speed they think they're going to go, is what she was talking about. And we've heard that from, you know, Henderson. We know Henderson has cracked down quite heavily.
They're
confiscating some of these e-bikes, and you know, and then they basically have them towed. They're not taking them; they're having them towed. It's just like your car. Yeah, exactly. You know, now you got to go pay to get your car out of impound, and you know, you know, John or Jenny has to go home and say, Mom, Dad, I don't have the e-bike.
It costs as much as the e-bike to
get it down at the impound. So that was one big thing that we did talk about. Also talked about, of course, you know, the big topic of the drop in enrollment that we've seen here. And I asked her, you know, what do you think about that? What's the impact to the classroom? And she basically said that, you know, this has kind of been adjusted for in the classroom. They kind of dealt with this back in February. She said, you know, we have only 150 vacancies. You know, that number has been a lot higher in the past. So they were pretty pleased about that. And that, you know, they said that they were no licensed teacher, professional, lost their job. And in fact, they hired 400 new teachers. And the class sizes she mentioned in the elementary level, about 20 per class. So she was pleased with that. But again, you know, she said down the road, though, what's going to happen? I mean, we're going to keep dropping, or are we going to stabilize here where we don't have to hire? We have to halt hiring, or maybe we keep hiring. But I said, well, will we have to cut? In 2 or 3 years? And she said maybe. So it was kind of a vague statement, and it really, that's kind of the case. It just depends what's going to happen in the next couple of years.
And I think it's important to know, people at home, to know that the reason why this is important is because the number of students they have equals the amount of money they get from the state, right? So if their student population is higher, they're going to get more money. They can employ more people. If it's lower, which is a trend across the country, that's not just here. That's not like the school system or school districts doing anything wrong.
Right.
It's just the birth rates of
that's,
people.
That's what they've
not as
said
many
a couple times.
Kids as there was before.
That's an interesting comment. Yeah, just number of births being lower, but you're right. I mean, there's the funding and the drop are definitely correlated. So hopefully we'll just kind of continue to move forward. They'll keep tracking it, and because it's tough. And I asked her about this too. Somebody who wants to maybe relocate here in Vegas to take a job, they come here, everybody moves here, the kids move here, spouse moves here, and then a couple of years later, you're kind of wondering if, you're going to have that job. And that's, it's teachers or anybody in a difficult position. Obviously, you go somewhere and then maybe you don't have a job. It's tough.
Yeah. You talked to the superintendent a few months ago, and you asked her to grade herself.
I
she
did.
Gave herself a grade. Now she did that again.
She did that again. Yeah, she was kind of surprised.
Went up slightly.
She was surprised when I asked her. And it was funny because after the interview, we kind of laughed about it. And I said, well, you didn't know I was going to ask you that? And she goes, I kind of forgot. So she could have prepared a little bit. But she said a B+ or A- was her grade. She was a B, I believe, the last time I asked her. And I did, talk to her about why she, deserves that grade. She said, raising the graduation number of graduates, bringing the community together around traffic safety, which we just talked about, being more efficient with tax dollars and driving them into the classroom, everyone working together on behalf of the students, and partnerships with businesses and so forth, including the Raiders and the Desert Dogs, which there was, exactly, whether or not we'd have that in the schools. And then Desert Dogs came to the district and said, hey, let's work something out. And they did. And she used that as an example.
I mean, it's not an easy job. I mean, the Clark County School District is one of the largest in the country. Multi-billion-dollar budget every year. So, and then thousands of employees. So, I mean, and you're having to deal with all that at the same time while dealing with declining enrollment and a declining reimbursement from the state.
Right. Exactly. I mean, certainly not an easy job, but, they're working to get everything working here. She was hired, and a lot of people support her. She's been here, very experienced, and we'll just have to see what happens in the next 2 or 3 years.
Aside from the number of students, does she talk at all? What about the future? Just what she sees coming up.
Well, I think the future was a bit uncertain. It kind of depends what happens with the enrollment and the budgeting. But right now they feel good about where they're at. Again, they added teachers last year. They didn't get rid of any licensed folks. When you're working somewhere, of course you like that stability. You don't like to wonder, but things change, and we'll just have to see down the road.
All right, Joe Vigil with a report card from the superintendent of schools. She graded herself. We did not grade her. She graded herself.
B+, A-.
From the last time that we talked to her. And you can find Joe's story. Actually, we've done a lot of stories. There's a whole behind the or back to school. I want to say behind the scenes because it says BTS. That's what I think of every time I see that. Not even the group.
Yeah, I was going to say. I was thinking about the group.
No, back to school. There's a lot of the whole section on the website, and we're, as we tape this, we're still leading up to it. So there's next week is the big week, and students will go back to school, and we're actually asking for some of your back to school photos. So you can find all that on fox5vegas.com, and a lot of the stories that Joe and some of the other reporters have done here at Fox 5 Vegas on Fox 5 Vegas Plus on the app there for streaming. So thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.